Welcome to episode 33 of Dysfunctional Nerdcast. I'm Aaron. I'm the one with all the action figures.
I'm Josh, who is not the completionist collector that this guy is. So I clearly do not have as many as you.
We're talking figures because we have the former owner of SOTA Toys, state-of-the-art toys, Jerry Macaluso.
Yep.
So good interview with him. A lot of detail about licensing arrangements in the collectible market, production, cost points, I guess where he sees the market going and where it's been. I thought it was pretty insightful, man.
It was. It was good to get like a little bit more behind the scenes of like what actually goes behind getting these figures in our hands and in our displays at home.
Right? Every fanboy complains, why can't they make that? Or why did they make it the way they did? And
you think you know?
Not really.
No. I mean, and this, very insightful.
So he's
a lot
been
of detail too.
He's been in the movie industry, you know, as a special effects guy, toy owner, toy sculptor. So he knows the ins and outs.
Yeah, and everything he did was just like experience to go to the next level. And he talks about doing all that.
So without further ado, here's Jerry. I guess to start off, can you just tell us, our audience, a little bit about who you are? I know you started off in special effects, like where you started and how you ultimately became into the toy industry.
Yeah, I'm pretty old. You know, I'm 51 now, and I started back in the early 80s doing prosthetics and creature stuff. Jim Henson was my hero as a kid, and I wanted to work on projects with him. I wanted to work for Jim Henson, building puppets and stuff like you would have seen in the Dark Crystal. I guess I was 15, maybe 16, when I saw on the local news that and this was in Miami. I saw on the local news that not too far from me lived an artist named Norman Cabrera, who was a pretty good effects guy, and he hadn't done anything professional yet, but he was about to do a small little horror movie in Miami called Scarecrows. So the news did an article on him, and I saw that, and I thought, wow, that's what I want to do. And somehow I got the nerve up to call the news station and see if they would give me his number. And, today they probably wouldn't give out somebody's number. But back then they were like, yeah, here's the guy's phone number. So I called Norman Cabrera up and asked if I could just hang out while he built these zombie scarecrows and learn. And he was generous enough to say, sure, come on by. That's how I sort of started. I didn't really have the natural talents that a lot of people do. It was very tough for me. In fact, very, very famous makeup artist, Dick Smith, who possibly the best makeup artist. Norman put me in touch with Dick Smith, and Dick Smith once told me, do you have a backup plan? Because I'm not so sure this is for you.
That's a little disheartening.
Yeah, a little harsh, man.
Well, one of the good things about Dick Smith was he was not afraid to tell it like he saw it, and that's what he saw. He did not see a natural ability, but thankfully I was thick-headed enough to instead of taking that the wrong way, which is, oh well, maybe I should go back to something else. I was like, well, I'll show you, Mr. Dick Smith. So I sort of doubled down on it, and I stopped socializing or anything, and literally I just spent 24/7 practicing making monsters.
So how did you get into toys? I mean, what were you, a collector of sorts? Did you just have fond memories of growing up with them, collecting, I don't know, Mego or whatever it was at that time? I'm from the 80s, so I was like a He-Man guy growing up. But what ultimately got you into it?
We were very poor, so I didn't have many toys. But the toys I did have, I cherished. I had Micronauts were my favorite. Micronauts came out in Micronauts came out 75, I think, a couple of years before Star Wars.
Right.
And so I had Micronauts. I had a couple Planet of the Apes, and then when Star Wars came out, I got the early bird, gift certificate set. But I couldn't say I was a collector. We just didn't have that kind of money. And then when I moved to LA from Miami to do effects, there was barely enough money to eat, so I definitely wasn't collecting toys. But what happened is I would go to Toys R Us all the time just because I liked looking at toys. Then I saw McFarlane's first wave of Spawn, and I thought, wow, these are really cool. I mean, these are better than, you know, what everybody else had been doing.
Yeah,
even though that first wave,
he changed the game.
Wave, he really did. I mean, Todd can be a difficult person, but he's quite brilliant. And even though that first wave of Spawn figures weren't, I mean, they were better than everything else on the shelf, but they weren't dramatically better. They were slightly better sculpted, blah, 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 because Todd was still kind of using the traditional action figure system to get toys made. So he hadn't quite become the Todd that would say, or that stood back and said, you know what, screw this. I'm going to do this completely different, and I'm just going to completely reinvent action figures. So he didn't do that till Wave 2. So I saw those toys and I thought, wow, this is great. I think at the time I was the effects supervisor on the first season of Power Rangers. And while that sounds fancy, I think I made like $300 a week. So it wasn't fancy. And, you know, I thought, wow, maybe toys would be fun to do as well as effects. And so once the second wave of Spawn, I'm not sure if it was when it came out or when I just saw it in magazines, but the second wave of Spawn really just changed everything. And when I saw that, that's when I said, you know what, I'm going to put a little package together of my effects sculpting and designing, and I'm going to send it to Todd McFarlane and see if I could get a job with Todd McFarlane, which I did. Or I didn't get a job, but I sent the package out. And Todd must not have been very impressed because I did not get the magical phone call giving me a job that I had wanted. But instead of giving up, what I noticed was there were all these other companies starting to be influenced by what Todd was doing, such as Resortis, and even Playmates was and Treadmaster were upping their game, and Toy Biz for sure with Digger and Art Asylum. And so I sent packages out to the other companies, and lo and behold, every single company got back to me saying, hey, we would like you to sculpt for us.
I know they do 2-ups, or they did back in the day. Is that still something that companies do to be able to sculpt it bigger and ultimately shrink it down?
Back in the day, most of the action figures, at least from bigger reputable companies, were done as 2-ups because we felt that was the only way to get the detail we wanted. But the first figures I did were not 2-ups. They were actual size. The kind of cheaper companies, Applause, Equity, they did not do the 2-up thing. They did the 1-to-1. I think even bigger companies like Mattel and Hasbro did 1-to-1 as well. These days it's all digital, so no one has to do 2-ups or anything like that. You just sculpt it and then resize it when you want to 3D print it.
I was going to ask a little bit later on, how did the 3D printing change the industry? Is there as much need for sculptors, or is it done digitally and then, like you said, they print it out? How has that changed as far as sculptors themselves? Sculpting
in 3D and digital lacks a bit of the life that, or the quote unquote soul that I think figures in the past, when they were done hand sculpted traditionally, have. At the same time, there's a tremendous amount of benefits to 3D. But as far as the sculptors, I don't think it makes all that much of a difference. I think it's fairly easy. If you can sculpt traditionally, I think it's fairly easy to transition to 3D. But I'm not so sure if the opposite works, where if you never sculpted traditionally and you started in 3D or digitally, if you can transition to clay and wax all that easily. Wax is a really difficult medium to get used to. The big Achilles heel was that everybody was doing these 2-piece front back drafted sculptures so that they can do hollow shell, ABS plastic action figures. The reason you would do ABS hollow shell, the reason the reason all companies did ABS hollow shell action figures was because you only had to pay for the plastic of the shell. It wasn't a solid figure. So you saved, 80% on plastic cost because it was hollow. The problem with the hollow shell figures is you couldn't have dramatic depth in anything. Everything had to kind of be sculpted shallow so that the mold, the plastic would pull out of the mold. If you imagine a torso, the front would pull out of the front half and the back pulls out of the back half. And there you go. And you sonic weld these two shells together. I always like that term, sonic weld. You sonic weld the shells together, and now you have let's say your torso, and it's hollow. What Todd saw was that if you did solid PVC, you can have much more depth and detail, and you can do crazy shapes. Not only that, he said, you know what? Why are we limited to only a 2-piece mold, a front and a back? Why can't we have a 6-piece mold to create a more complicated shape? And, the answer was, well, because companies like Hasbro and Mattel didn't want to pay for a 6-piece mold. And Todd was like, screw that. I don't want to say he said to himself that, you know what, I'm just going to make it as cool as possible, and whatever it costs, it costs. But it certainly seems that was his attitude because, he just completely upped the game. Suddenly there were all these complicated sculptures coming out, and he went from, a typical action figure in the 80s and early 90s before McFarlane came on the scene had, 4 to 6 paint apps.
Right.
And on wave 2 of Spawn, series 2, they were suddenly doing like 18 paint apps. And, that was unprecedented. Nobody had done anything like that ever. And paint washes too, that nobody had ever tried. He was injecting, art into action figures. He wasn't just approaching them as a toy. And I think that's because he was smart enough to realize his market were adults. It wasn't kids anymore. It was adults, the same adults who were buying his, 20 copies of his Spider-Man.
So you went into like a lot of good detail on like the sculpting and the different mediums to use in that. When you started the SOTA Toys, and you had that for how many years were you running that company?
Well, SOTA Toys is a little complicated in that it was originally SOTA Sculpture and Design, and that was a division of SOTA Effects, which was our effects company, which I owned with my partner at that time was a great guy named Roy Canarum, and we were partners in the effects company. And then when I started to branch out into toy development, because at first it was sculpting for companies like Toy Biz and Resortis and Applause and Playmates, and even a little bit for Mattel. So when we branched out, we wanted to keep the SOTA name, which is supposed to stand for state of the art. Mm-hmm. So Roy wasn't really interested in the toy thing. So I formed SOTA Sculpture and Design myself. And SOTA Sculpture and Design did prototyping all the way up until, I think it was 98 or 99 was when I dipped my toes into manufacturing for the first time. Even though we were still, 99.9% development, I'm a big Planet of the Apes fan. And the head of my sort of, I guess I'd call him my company manager, is a great guy named Vince Adoni, who he was also a huge Planet of the Apes fan. And he was collecting all sorts of original Planet of the Apes props at that time. He had a full-size Thrilla, and all sorts of great props. He said, why don't we do some Planet of the Apes figures? I don't remember how we got the contact info, but there was this really sweet lady, name was Kathleen, and I can't remember her last name, but she worked at 20th Century Fox, and she was in charge of licensing for 20th Century Fox. And she had been there since the 70s. So she was like the person that did the deal with Mego for Planet of the Apes. So it was always cool to just talk to her about stuff. And, we said, hey, we're, I don't know what we were, 20, 28 maybe, we're doing a lot of we told her we're doing a lot of the prototyping for these big companies. And we want to make our first action figure. And we want to do Planet of the Apes. And she said, oh, I can't give you Planet of the Apes for action figures. That's too big a license. Anyway, she said, but look, here's what I'll do. I'll give you a tiny license. You can do some Planet of the Apes mini busts. And at the time, mini busts were kind of a popular category. And we were like, wow, I mean, anything. This is our first license. We were on cloud nine thinking this is so cool. So I formed SOTA Toys to do this Planet of the Apes mini bust.
How many sculptors did you have at any given time?
It hovered, 5 to 10, probably.
Okay.
At SOTA Sculpture and Design. Yeah, and so that brings us to SOTA Toys. So after Planet of the Apes, which was our first actual product, which bombed, by the way, we lost money. I should say I lost money on the Planet of the Apes. They came out pretty crappy. The paint was horrible. They just came out bad. I didn't go to China. I didn't have the money at that time. It was hard enough to come up with the money just to get them into production. And at that time, it wasn't a pre-order based world. So what you would do is you'd make them, you'd bring them into the US, and then you cross your fingers and hope they sold. But they did not sell at all. We had, I think we made 6,000 pieces, and they just sat in our in the effect shop warehouse forever until one day I got in touch with Diamond Comics Distribution and said, if I sell these to you for pennies on the dollar, will you buy them? And they said, yeah. And we got them out of the warehouse, but I lost thousands of dollars on the Planet of the Apes. And so that's when I told myself, well, I won't be making things anymore. I'm just going to stick to doing development for other people.
So I mean,
I don't know if you want.
I was going to ask you a little bit about getting into the licensing thing. I mean, your Now Playing line, I would imagine, was highly successful. They were fantastic figures.
In fact, Now Playing was a labor of love that I didn't even know would make money, but we were doing so well financially that I thought, okay, let's take a risk. But if you don't mind, I can rewind back to how I changed my tune.
Sure.
Going from, well, I'm not going to manufacture stuff anymore, to, okay, I will manufacture stuff again. And if we rewind back to, I guess this was the year 2000, there was a new company called Palisades Toys,
right,
which basically Palisades rose from the ashes of Resource. Almost everybody at Palisades, other than the two owners, Mike Horn and now I can't remember the co-owner's name, because I'm still friends with Mike Horn. I talk to him all the time, but I don't talk to the other guy, so I can't remember his name. But other than the two owners, pretty much, most of the crew of the new company, Palisades, was taken from the collapsed Resource. So Ken Lilly was there and stuff like that. So Palisades was working on a deal to do Street Fighter action figures. Somehow that deal didn't work out. I do know the details, but it's not my place to talk about them. So the deal didn't work out. The deal was being negotiated between Capcom and Palisades by a gentleman named Mark Mostman. And Mark was Capcom's licensing agent at that time. And my company was going to do a lot of the development and sculpting for these Street Fighter action figures that Mark Mostman or that Palisades was going to do. And Mark knew that. Mark didn't live all that far from me, and so we knew each other because Mark's a giant toy collecting geek as well. And so we knew each other anyway. And so Mark contacted me one day and said, look, I don't think this deal with Palisades is going to work out. Would you be interested, since you were going to sculpt them anyway, would you be interested in taking the Street Fighter license? I said, absolutely not. I don't have that kind of money. And I lost all this money on Planet of the Apes. And that is not for me. I'm just going to, whoever gets a license, just give them my name and we'll sculpt them and design them and do all that stuff. But I'm not going to take the license myself. I just don't have it in me. That conversation, though, kind of put a bug in my ear as to wanting to get back into manufacturing again. It had been, I don't know, a couple years between this and Planet of the Apes crashing and burning. So, but I thought, okay, but I still can't do Street Fighter because it's too big a project, too much money. So what else can I do? And that's when I realized I was friends with, this is such a convoluted story. I was friends with Jenna Jameson's husband.
Okay.
And I knew her.
Okay.
I knew her as well. But really it was her husband, Jay, that I was friends with. And because they were friends with my girlfriend at the time. And so I said, hey, why don't we do a Jenna action figure? And they were totally down for it. And I thought, okay, this is something I could handle because I'm not going to have to pay a company like Capcom $30,000 or something as a licensing fee. I'm not going to have to come out of the gate with 4 or 5 figures that are going to cost $100,000 in tooling. I can just do one action figure of this woman who is very popular. And, so if it bombs, I'm not going to go bankrupt. And so we did a deal to do the Jenna Jameson action figure. And at that time, Claymore, who's brilliant, and I'm sure your listeners know who Clay is.
Yeah.
Clay's action figures were really, really hot. His interpretation on characters like Lady Death, Clay's style was really hot. And I thought, you know what, let's do Jenna in Claymore's style so it fits in with all these beautiful female action figures that Clay is sculpting, as opposed to trying to do a realistic Jenna. And Jenna actually wasn't all that happy with that direction. But when we said, well, this is probably what's going to sell the best, then she was okay with it because ultimately for her, it was about making some money. And honestly, for us, it was about making money too. So we went that direction. So we did the Jenna figure, and Jenna hated it. And we put it up. I had now that I had sold all those Planet of the Apes busts to Diamond, I knew the people at Diamond, and so they put it in their catalog. They tried to do pre-orders, but I didn't really know anyone else. I didn't know anyone internationally to sell to. And even though I was doing development for companies like Palisades and Spin Master and all these other companies, I didn't have the balls to ask them for, hey, can you hook me up with your distributors? There was no way I was going to say that. I couldn't find anywhere to sell these figures to. And, but we ended up making, I don't know, maybe we made 5,000 or 10,000 the first run. At that time, factories weren't as amicable about doing small runs like 1,000 or 2,000. So at the very least, we did 5,000, but it's possible we did 10,000. And like the Planet of the Apes, we couldn't give these things away. Nobody wanted a Jenna Jameson action figure that was cartoony, quote unquote. So I thought, okay, well, I tried it twice. This is a complete failure. I'm definitely not doing this again. I'm just going to sculpt for other people. It's way safer. But what happened is, and again, this goes back to my fuzzy memory. I'm not sure if it was Jay Leno or Howard Stern who did it first, but one of them had the figure on their show. My memory wants to say it was Leno. And he came out and he did his shtick and he held up the Jenna Jameson figure and he did his little, he made a couple jokes about it and blah, blah, blah. And the next day, the phone wouldn't stop ringing.
Awesome. Yeah, it makes sense.
Sometimes that's all it takes. Right?
Everybody wanted a Jenna Jameson action figure. And I started to get emails and phone calls from companies internationally who were like, hi, I'm so-and-so from Moscow, and I would like to buy some Jenna Jameson action figures. And suddenly, everything we had in stock was being sold, and the orders were coming in for more. And that was a very, very exciting time. We were, this may sound a little obnoxious, but at the time, it's what we said. It was like having a money tree. The orders just kept coming and coming, and we would sell a container to Germany, a container to Italy, a container to Russia, a container to Japan, and we were selling them at a premium. I believe they were $20, and they cost about $250 to make. So it was crazy, and so that was really the genesis of everything going forward. Was that Jenna figure blowing up right after it seemed that all was lost.
So, I mean, with the licensing then of the Now Playing line, you did like a Pumpkinhead and Legend. Were those personal properties that you just wanted to make, or were they easier licenses to obtain? What was the end game? Just to make something you wanted, or something that you knew 100% would sell?
It was a combination of licenses that I loved and stuff that was cheap and easy to get. I wasn't sure any of them were going to sell, but I loved them, and now that I had the success with the quote-unquote adult superstars line of action figures, we had the money to take a chance, to take some risks. And I've always been a risk taker, probably because, we grew up poor and we never knew where we were going to live. So I never had a sense of safety behind me. And so I don't mind taking risks because I've never felt safe. So Now Playing, Todd had already released a couple series of Now Playing,
Movie Maniacs. Yeah.
And I bought them all and I loved them. But I remember reading an interview with Todd where someone asked him about some of these more B or C. I don't consider them B or C, but I guess Todd considered them B or C licenses, like American Werewolf, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. And he was like, that's just not going to sell. And I thought, okay, I don't mind eating Todd McFarlane's crumbs. So he has already established this market for cool horror movie figures with Movie Maniacs. So maybe I can go grab these licenses and eat Todd's crumbs. I mean, I don't know what Todd, at that time, I didn't know what Todd would sell of a Jason figure or whatever. But I assumed, I could maybe sell half of a figure of whatever he did. So I started to call all the studios, and thankfully, by this time I had done the Tomb Raider action figures. So I had some legitimacy behind me, because if I was only the guy who had done Jenna Jameson, I was not going to get in the door. But the Jenna figure led to the Tomb Raider figure, and the Tomb Raider figure those were quite successful. And that opened the door for me to be able to call any movie studio and say, hey, we did the Angelina Jolie Tomb Raider figures, and I'm interested in this movie that you represent. And we could get anybody on the phone. Todd had licenses for a few of the things I really wanted, so I couldn't get those. A few of the things had licensing issues. Like I put a lot of work into trying to get Hellraiser. And this was well before NECA ended up, doing some Hellraiser, all Hellraiser. But there was still licensing issues. So what was now playing Series 1? It was Darkman, American Werewolf, and Toxic Avenger.
Yeah.
I think that was Series 1.
Darkman. You said Darkman?
Yeah. I did Toxic Avenger for the movie. So nobody knew Toxie better than I did. So that was a really easy license to get.
You worked on Darkman as well, right?
I worked on Darkman, though I didn't work on the prosthetics. I worked in the miniatures department on Darkman. But still, I knew Sam Raimi because of that. And so that was helpful. And Darkman and American Werewolf were both at Universal. So I thought, okay, I'll go to Universal because they have a bunch of licenses that I don't think Todd McFarlane wants, but that I do. So the meeting at Universal was a big one because even though Series 1 only had American Werewolf and Darkman, I bought a bunch of licenses at the same time to fill out Series 2 and 3 and however far it would go. So, Universal also had Dune. They also had, what else do we have at Universal? The Birds. Even though that figure never got made, it was developed. Universal also had, I can't remember, but there were, Tremors, another one from Universal. Wait, no, Tremors wasn't Universal. But there were a bunch of licenses that I got from Universal all at once. Now, I'll tell you a funny anecdote about Universal Darkman and licensing. I knew Sam Raimi because I had worked on the original Darkman movie. And so I asked him, how do I get a Darkman license? And he said, I don't own it. Universal owns it. So I asked Universal, I said, I'd like to get this license to do a Darkman action figure. And Universal said, we don't have the rights to Darkman. Sam Raimi's company has the rights to Darkman. And so I went back to Sam and I said, Universal says you have the rights. And Sam laughed and says, no, I don't have the rights. I wish I had the rights because, I'd be making more money off of it. They have the rights. And so I had to go back to Universal again and say, look, Sam Raimi says you have the rights. So Universal said, okay, you know what? We're going to ask our legal department to look into it. And it took months because it wasn't a big deal. I mean, their legal department's busy doing, big negotiations and research for important things, not for my little Darkman project. But eventually they did. And they came back and they said, hey, you were right. We do have the rights to Darkman. Thanks for pointing that out because now we can capitalize on these rights and actually license it. So I thought that was really funny. And because of that, they gave me a massive discount on my licensing fee.
Work well deserved, yeah.
So that was fun.
So I guess, I mean, to get a license, all you really do is contact the movie studio to start, and they kind of put you in a direction. Like, how do character likenesses factor into it? Like, was Kurt Russell's likeness part of the movie likeness license, or did you have to get that separately? How do you even find out that type of information?
Well, the long answer is licensing has gone through a transition. In some ways, in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was easier. In some ways, it was harder. It was harder at that time in the sense that you couldn't go on the internet. I mean, we had the internet, but you couldn't find who the licensing head was at Universal on the internet at that time. There was no LinkedIn or anything like that. So when you approached them, they were not receptive. These big studios were not receptive at all to some, 29, 30-year-olds who'd never really done much in licensing one of their big characters. They just were not interested. So they wanted to see all of your finances and stuff like that. And so it was a lot more challenging back then to do licensing in that way. Something like, and every project is different. Something like The Thing, where we got Kurt Russell's likeness. My memory is that Kurt retained his own likeness rights. So anything that was done would have to get not only the studio, Universal's approval, but Kurt Russell's approval. At that time, the studios didn't mind going to the actors and dealing with that. So, we would submit our stuff to Universal proper, and Universal would then go back to Kurt Russell, or in the case of American Werewolf, John Landis, because John Landis, even though Universal owned American Werewolf in London, John retained approvals. And I don't know if that was a contractual thing or if it was just a respect thing, but John had to approve everything. These days, it's different. So, like right now, I don't think I'm giving away anything that's too secret, but right now, the rights for The Thing have reverted back to the owner of the original story, who goes there. So you have three parties. If you want to do something based on the movie The Thing, from the Kurt Russell version, Universal has to approve the movie stuff. You still have to get, not necessarily approval, but you have to pay the estate of, who wrote Who Goes There? Now I can't remember. But you have to get their approval, and then you have to get Kurt Russell's approval for anything that has his likeness. In the studio, nobody wants to deal with the Kurt Russell side. Not that he's difficult or anything, but they just don't want to deal with it anymore. So you have to kind of do it all yourself. So you'd have to go to Kurt Russell's attorney to get his rights. And while I worked with Kurt now on a couple things, not that we're buddies, I wish we were, but he's a super, super nice guy. But his attorney, and most of these celebrities, actors, attorneys are not so nice.
That's what they're paid for. Yeah.
Right. It's hard to get anywhere. Not that I've gone after this license lately, but it would be hard to get anywhere with a big actor's attorney unless you're waiving huge amounts of money, and you're not. I mean, when you're doing these action figures, it's not, no actor like Kurt Russell is going to say yes because of the money. I mean, what you pay them in a licensing fee is what they make in like 2 days in residuals, maybe. So it's more about them just wanting to do it. And if you want, I can segue into my Jack Nicholson licensing story.
Sure.
Absolutely.
That seems like he'd be interesting to work with.
So I am a huge Jack Nicholson fan, and I wanted to do something Jack Nicholson. And I had heard that, McFarlane had wanted to do The Shining, but he couldn't get the rights. And my attorney happened to be, I don't know if I'd use the word friends, but he knew Jack Nicholson's attorney. So he said, hey, let's see if I can get Jack Nicholson to give us likeness rights. If he gives us likeness rights, then we can go to any studio in town from any Jack Nicholson movie other than The Shining, because Kubrick's estate controlled that. And we can do some Jack Nicholson stuff. And I thought, okay, but really, what Jack Nicholson action figures other than The Shining would sell? And Wolf wasn't that old at that time. And I thought, well, maybe Wolf, because you got Jack and he's got the cool Wolf teeth that Rick Baker made, and the other one was Witches of Eastwick. So we thought, okay, you know what? It's worth it because we could do Wolf and Witches of Eastwick. You know, we started, I think we offered Jack Nicholson's attorney $20,000 or something for his likeness rights, and he laughed. And he started with something ridiculous, like $1 million. It was something so absurd. We finally did a deal for $100,000 for Jack Nicholson's likeness rights. We did a deal for Wolf and for Jack Nicholson, and that was going to be a Now Playing series, I guess 4. But I sold the company before it happened. So that's the sad ending to that is it didn't happen, but it could have.
So he walks away with the $100K. You don't get to, I guess, recoup that if it didn't happen, huh?
Mm.
Or is it contingent upon the figure actually being made?
There was a deposit. There was a deposit made. I don't remember how much it was. It was a significant deposit. It wasn't like $5,000 or something. It was a lot. And then the rest would be paid. There was going to be a payment upon approval. So like once he approves the figure, and then a payment when it's shipped.
Okay.
So it was probably 30%. So maybe we were out $30,000 or so.
Okay.
That was my Jack Nicholson story. And I was always been bummed that the 2 figures that we had started development and basically paid for that never came out, that really bummed me out, is Jack and Wolf and the Birds.
Those would have both been killer.
We did a Heidi and a broken phone booth with birds all over it. I don't think we sculpted. I think we only did designs. But The Birds is one of my favorite movies of all time. So I was really bummed that that one didn't get finished. There were at least 8 Now Playing figures in development when I sold the company that never saw the light of day, which is quite a big bummer.
Is there any licenses of movies today that you're surprised haven't been turned into an action figure or that you would kill to do? Like, to me, like The Strangers should be action figures. I don't see how those don't sell, but...
Oh, yeah. You know what? That's funny because I have... I'm sort of retired now, but I'm not somebody who... I don't like golf. So I have to do stuff to stay busy. And so I am dabbling in some manufacturing, some figures. So anyway, point is, I've been putting a list together of more modern horror films that I think could use an action figure, and The Strangers is pretty close to the top of my list. I think it's one of the few modern horror films that is as good as the classics that I grew up with. I don't like the sequel, but the original, very, very good movie. And I'd also love to see figures from The Strangers.
Well, that's good to hear. Hopefully, somewhere down the line here.
Too. We both enjoy that movie a lot.
You got 2 buyers.
Yeah.
To answer your first question, though, which is basically 2 questions, there's nothing I'm surprised at not being made. Stuff like, Braveheart. I know why it's not made, and I know why it's probably never going to be made. So I'm not surprised it hasn't been made, but I am disappointed it hasn't been made. It's just that, some of these actors like Mel Gibson, until, and this sounds crude, and I don't mean it disrespectfully, but until he dies, it's not going to happen. He doesn't want to do it. Once he passes away, his estate will probably want to do it. And that's what you see happening. That's why, you got Clockwork Orange figures. Is once the estate took over, the Kubrick estate, same thing with 2001, the Kubrick estate was far more open to doing that kind of stuff than Stanley Kubrick himself would have ever been open to doing. Same thing probably with Coppola's Dracula.
Are you surprised at the success Funko has? I mean, I kind of am, with the fact that they get 1 million licenses, and for one, that there's even a market for half the licenses they get. I mean, they make everything under the sun.
Yeah, you name it, they make it.
It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I don't particularly like the Funko style. So it's hard for me. Not that I think it's bad. I just don't get it. So it's hard for me to get my head around how popular it has become. I remember back in the early 2000s when my SOTA Toys booth was 3 times the size of Funko's booth, and we thought of Funko as these. Well, it's a cute little company making their little bobbleheads and stuff. And nobody saw that juggernaut.
They've taken over the world.
Yeah. But from a creative standpoint, I don't get Funko at all. It's not my thing. As a sculptor and a designer, I prefer to make things that are as accurate to the source or as accurate to real life as possible. So I'm not really into art toys as much. But as a business case, I think there should probably be classes in college business courses based on Funko, because what they've managed to do, Brian in particular, once he bought the company, is amazing. I mean, it truly is.
The ability to reuse molds like they can, and just keep selling and selling and selling. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, the closest thing I could think to Funko is when Marty Abrams got Mego going. They just kind of came out of nowhere and did their own thing and had massive success at it.
I guess sticking along these lines, I have a pretty loaded question with, the collectible market for figures has definitely changed since, the heydays of, I would say, like the 2000s. What do you think, in your opinion, has made such a difference that there's not as many figures being made, there's not as many companies around, it doesn't seem like the production numbers are as high? I guess, what are your thoughts on the overall market trend?
I don't know that I agree that there aren't as many figures being made. I think there's more. I think there's more figures being made now than at any point in history.
Just seems like McFarlane
right.
majorly cut back. Neck is still
low.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, but you can see it kind of goes back to supply and demand, market economics, in that when your volume is low per figure, you have to make more SKUs to make up for that. Back in the 90s, up until the action figure bubble burst around 2006, 2006, I guess. You could, you make your figure and you're going to sell 30, 40, 50, 100,000 pieces. Something that sold 30,000 pieces in the year 2000 was considered a failure. It was a disappointment. So you didn't have to make, as many different figures, because you knew the ones you were making were going to sell somewhere between 30 and 100,000. When we did Tomb Raider, the second movie, I forget if it was Trendmaster or Playmates that did the first movie. But so my company, SOTA Toys, did the second movie, Cradle of Life, I think it was. And we sold, I can't remember if it was just under 100,000 pieces or just over 100,000 pieces of Angelina Jolie as Lara Croft. I grew up poor, so you can work those numbers. To me, it was a huge hit. But to my sales agent, he was really disappointed. He was like, "Oh, we should have done 200,000 or 300,000 pieces of this. What a disappointment!" And I'm like, "Are you crazy? This is huge." And then I found out that places like Palisades, if they did under 200,000 pieces, they considered it a disappointment. The market was so different then. Now, I don't want to give away other companies' numbers, but we use the same factories, so I know their numbers. But let's just say, if an established action figure company does 20,000 pieces of a character these days, they're thrilled.
So why do you think that was such a drastic drop that collectors aren't buying as much?
I think think it's a combination of things. I think the biggest one is that back in the 90s up until the early 2000s, it was just such a new, different thing. Like, you never thought, I always go back to McFarlane doing Austin Powers. You would have never thought you'd see that action figure. And here was a whole 2 lines of them. Maybe it was 3 lines of Austin Powers. And so, you know, it was all so new. I mean, every month you'd go into the toy store and you'd be like, holy crap, there's a Pumpkinhead figure. And just the stuff you grew up with or that you love, even new stuff that you love, like Austin Powers or The Matrix, and you're just like, this is so cool. I have a physical representation of this character, and I can put it on my desk, and it only cost me $15. But eventually, the coolness wears off, and I compare it to relationships, girlfriends, boyfriends. Most of the time, you start a relationship and it seems fantastic, and you're happy and you're excited, and you can't wait to see that person. And 6 months later, you're kind of over them. You don't want to be over them, but you just kind of growing bored of them for some inexplainable reason. And I think it's the same with action figures. It just wasn't exciting and new anymore. It just, you know, oh, okay, yeah, well, that's really cool that there's I'm trying to think of Little Nicky, which I happened to work on the movie. And so Little Nicky, to me, was, I believe it was one of the first McFarlane lines that bombed. And, you know, it came after Austin Powers and The Matrix and a few other new movies. He went from focusing on old classics to doing a little more of current hits. And Little Nicky, by all accounts, should have been a big hit for him, but it wasn't. It bombed. And so I call it the Little Nicky syndrome, where, you know, you're just kind of over it.
See, for your relationship analogy, I'm like the stalker in the relationship. I've never left. Got like 5,000 figures at home, and it's just, I don't know. To me, I guess it gets a little bit to the point where you kind of have it already, or when's enough? You only have so much space.
Right.
I don't know if the market itself is also like that demographic of age is growing up to the point where we have families now. There's other expenses. I don't know if we just stopped buying. I don't know if kids today are going to be nostalgia over toys like we were for movie properties and so forth. I don't know. Like you said, right. I think there's plenty of things that factor into it.
Well, you're right. I mean, those of us who were young when the action figure, the McFarlane created action figure boom started, we did move on to other things. And I mean, I'm sitting in a studio, my home studio right now, surrounded by maybe thousands of action figures in display cases. So, you know, but most of them are old. You know, I don't buy a lot of new stuff, even though the new stuff is brilliant. I mean, the stuff that NECA does these days with their figures, the quality is beautiful. Mezco's 112 line, the quality is beautiful. I mean, I love Mez. We've been friends forever, and I think those figures are gorgeous. But I've only bought a couple of them, not because they're not beautiful, but just because I already have all those characters in another form
right
already. I just don't feel that need. A good example is, so when Hot Toys started doing all the Star Wars stuff with Force Awakens, I was in 100%. I bought every single Hot Toys figure, Star Wars figure that they were making, even though I had some of them already from Sideshow. You know, I bought the Hot Toys version, and at some point, I realized I had a dozen different stormtroopers. How many stormtroopers do I need? Even though they're all kind of different. And then I just kind of clicked off, and I just stopped buying Hot Toys Star Wars, except for certain characters that, you know, are really classic characters that I just, you know, like the Emperor that just recently came out. but I'm just not doing it anymore. Not because I don't love it, not because I don't think they're brilliant. There's something in me that doesn't feel like I have to buy it anymore.
I guess for the price point of figures, without giving too much away, do you think the prices have rose as a fact that they're not selling as many in quantity, or is it really just that, I mean, everything goes up in price, obviously, but it seems like figures are continuously going up. It's like $30 a figure now. Is that to try to make up for, I guess, not selling into the hundreds of thousands?
It's a little bit of everything. One, prices in China have gone up, though interestingly, I recently gotten some quotes on some action figures I'm doing, and the prices aren't that much higher than they were in the year 2003. They are for statues, polystone, totally different subject. Polystone prices have gone through the roof, but action figure prices haven't really gone up that much. And I think it's because action figures can be done by just about any plastics factory in China, and there are hundreds and hundreds of plastics factories. So the price hasn't gone up that much. So I don't blame China for most of the rise in cost. I blame the volume of not selling, and that's a slippery slope. It's this circular situation in that. Okay, so let's say the company was selling 100,000 pieces on average, and then it fell to 70,000 pieces. So they're going to have to raise their price a little bit to make up for that. But then when they raise their price, they're going to lose some more customers.
Right.
And so it's this vicious double-edged sword where it's almost like what's the phrase, race to the bottom. So you're raising your price to make up for lack of volume, but by raising your price, you're going to lose more sales. And a smart business will find that equilibrium point. But it's very, very difficult to find. I don't know that I've ever been good enough at business to find that point perfectly. It always seems like, you overshoot it one way or the other. But yeah, I think it's a lack of volume. I also think part of the lack of volume is because there's no brick and mortar. I shouldn't say no, but there's few brick and mortar places to get these figures from anymore.
And it seems like the existing ones don't carry nearly as many as they used to. As far as Spencer's or FYE, they're not really carrying action figures anymore. GameStop's very limited.
Right. And I remember back at SOTA, again, my flaky memory, 2004 maybe, when when Tower Records and Musicland went bankrupt, that killed us.
Yeah, that was a great place for figures.
In the States, in the U.S., we sold the majority of our figures, whether it was Now Playing or Street Fighter or Adult Superstars. Most of them were sold through Musicland, Suncoast, and Tower Records. And when they went bankrupt, figure sales just plummeted. And I think it's because, and this kind of coalesces with your earlier question, I think a lot of this stuff is impulse buy. You're walking by and you're like, holy crap, look at that. That's a figure of Jax Teller from Sons of Anarchy. I just watched that last night. Oh, it's $15. Okay, I'm going to grab it. Where now, if you want to action figures are destination purchases, you have to oh, I heard there's a Jax Teller figure out there. I'm going to go on Google and figure out where to get it. That's a lot more work. So impulse buys don't really exist that way anymore. Now, I mean, not anymore, but let's say a year ago when we still did have a Toys R Us, I would browse Toys R Us every so often, and I would say, oh, look, I didn't realize, NECA did a figure, a new Ash figure from Ash, the TV show. I'm going to grab that, but I'm not going to go on Google and search it out, and I'm not going to go order it and pay for shipping. And I think that's that decline of brick and mortar is a big part of the problem. I mean, we had an end cap at Musicland and Suncoast Video for Now Playing. That's unimaginable today.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, the random people that will buy it on an impulse, they might not even know to search for it online because they don't even know it exists.
Exactly.
If you don't know what to look for, you can't find it.
You know, I don't follow action figures as closely these days. I get most of my info on what's coming out from Facebook, where, because I'm friends with so many people in the business, I'll see, oh, you know, so-and-so I know is doing this, and that's cool. Maybe I'll pick that up. But I don't follow it in the sense of like news, like I would have back in the day with Toy Fair magazine. So I'm just not aware of some of the cool stuff coming out. And there's so much that it's hard to keep up with. I mean, gosh, what, Funko alone announced 500 SKUs or something at Toy Fair. Something ridiculous. I'm sure I'm exaggerating, but
I don't know if you are. I don't think you are.
There were so many that I didn't even scroll through all of them. At some point I was like, wow, this is like a never-ending page. Yeah. But again, you know, I don't want to give out proprietary,
right.
Proprietary, but numbers that I hear from factories of other companies. But I do hear that you know, the Funko numbers are dramatically lower than they were even 5 years ago. And I don't know if that's people just growing disinterested in Funko, or if it's so many Funko SKUs out there that people just can't afford to buy them all. So everybody's being quite selective, which means that the least popular characters just sell very tiny numbers. Man, I do have a Bob Ross Funko figure because I love Bob Ross and I will buy anything Bob Ross. But who doesn't love Bob Ross?
I think Neck is doing Amigo Bob Ross.
Oh yeah, no, and I'm getting it.
And I guess my part of it is, you know, as far as exclusives, when do you start to turn off the collector because they just make everything limited, that you can't even get it anymore, or there's 20 different versions of the same thing? Where do you draw the line, or where do you think it should be drawn?
When's enough is enough kind of thing?
Really, really complicated question.
Yeah.
And I've explored both extremes. I mean, I was heavily criticized back at SOTA Toys for doing so many variants on Street Fighter. In fact, I was the first, as far as I know, I was the first person to push variants that far. I mean, we would do 5 or 6 variants on a Street Fighter character. You know, some people loved it and some people hated it. Some people felt it was a money grab, and some people appreciated that they were able to get the the player 2 yellow gi Ryu that they never thought anybody would ever make. So it was tough. I mean, the extra revenue is nice, but the fact is, the variants don't sell that much. I mean, nobody's making a ton of money off of variants. And then when I started PCS, which is, you know, the statue company, I tried to do the opposite. I tried to do, you know, only one variant, but we got so many requests for more variants that I did more variants. And then, you know, some people hated that. And it's just a really tough balancing act to find the perfect, you know, again, equilibrium, you know, for variants and stuff like that.
I know there's just a fine line of, you don't want to turn, you know, collectors off altogether just because everything's too limited. But like you said, you do want to give people the option too to get what they want. You know, so
yeah, because, you know, I'm an eccentric person, and I like weird variants on things, and so I enjoy it when I see variants. I'm also not a completist. Like, I don't have that some people have a
I am. I have a
an
sickness.
emotional thing to where they have to buy everything. So when you see 5 variants, you're like, crap, that sucks because I got to get them all. But I'm not like that. So it never bothered me, when someone else did a bunch of variants, I would just pick the 1 or 2 that I loved the most. Same with, I'll go to Hot Toys. I have my Black Panther from the first movie. I don't need the Black Panther from the second movie. Or not second movie, but from the Avengers movie.
Yeah.
Or rather, I should say, I got that all confused. I have my Civil War Black Panther. I don't need the Black Panther movie Black Panther. And correct me if I'm wrong on that, because again, my memory gets that. But but some people do. They need them all. They need every representation of Black Panther that comes out. And I'm just not that guy, and I have a hard time getting into that headspace. So when people complain to me that, you're doing too many variants, I mean, my reaction is, well, you don't have to buy them. I mean, I appreciate it, don't get me wrong, but you don't have to.
And the thing, too, about a collector is you kind of do need something that not every single person has, or else what's the point? As a collector, you do want special things. You do want scarcity in collections. I just get annoyed. I collected all the McFarlane sports stuff, and when he started doing, variants of 100, you couldn't find them. So even if you had the money to get it, you still couldn't. That's where it was kind of like it drew the line for me.
I didn't know he did that.
Yeah, they did.
I'm not
like
a sports guy, so I didn't follow that at all. But that's 100 pieces. That's like
there were some that were 20. I mean, it went really kind of like the collectible card market where you had to pull these really scarce cards. That was, I guess, the mindset behind it. But
right, and I like cars a lot, and I have a lot of friends in the auto industry, and it's all about marketing. You're not making. I mean, obviously Todd's not making any money if he's doing a run of 20 or 100 pieces.
Right.
So why bother? Well, you bother because it's really cheap. It's a real cheap way to get good marketing. And that's the same reason, Chevy does, a limited edition Corvette and only makes, 400 of them. That money is meaningless to a company like GM. It's not very much money, but they will get nice write-ups by all the car magazines and websites. And that may get someone to buy a normal Corvette, or maybe get 10,000 people to buy a normal Corvette. And so it's the same with collectibles. You do stuff sometimes to generate interest in the other stuff. I've done that at times as well, where we've done tiny runs. I think the one that I remember the most was we did a run of Street Fighter action figures where all the characters were translucent, if I remember correctly. And we did like 50 pieces or something really low. And we only sold them in Japan, if my memory is correct. And obviously we're not making any money off of that. It did draw attention to the line in general.
All right. Well, I'll get you out of here on that. I had one last question, kind of got lost in the shuffle, so it's a little out of sequence with stuff. But how long does it actually take you to make a figure from time of concept to the figure being on the shelf? And I know you said you did statues as well. Is that a different time frame for the statues?
Yeah, it goes everywhere, and I'll try not to make this answer way too long, but you face a lot of challenges. One is licensing, is the licensing approval. Sometimes, you can get an approval in a day, and sometimes it takes 6 months to even hear back. Now, contractually, you're never supposed to have to wait that long. Contractually, every contract I've ever seen has a 10-day minimum. In other words, if you don't hear back within 10 days, it's considered approved and you could just continue to move on with your project. However, it doesn't quite work that way in practice because, your contract may say that, but are you really going to want to piss off Disney No. So, I hear that these days people have to wait months to hear back on Star Wars approvals. And even though your contract may say you could continue on after 10 days, you don't, because you don't want to piss them off. I had a couple run-ins with Capcom, who I love. I'm not talking bad about Capcom. Capcom's always been very, very good to me. But there have been times where I was, we were doing a project, the only feedback we got from Capcom was, hey, that looks good. That's it. And then 3 months later, we'll get an email saying, so-and-so doesn't like this. And we're like, but we're already like tooling this in China. We can't change it now. Well, we kind of need you to. And, the worst thing you could ever do in business is throw out the whole, at least in collectibles, my experience, is throw out the whole, well, contractually it says, because at that point, as soon as you do that, you may as well have said, we'll sue you if you don't, live up to our contract. Because that's really what you're saying. And then your relationship is done. It's just done. It's never gonna go well with them again. They probably aren't going to renew you. And so even though your contract may say 10 days for approvals, it's just not the way it works. You're at their mercy. So
once you have the approval in hand and you start manufacturing, how long is it from that point?
Right.
Get the stuff on the boat and
so it depends on the complexity, and it depends on, one, the complexity. Two, it depends on how busy your factory is, and three, it depends on how much negotiating you've done with your factory. So, for example, let's say you give a figure to your factory to quote, and they come back and they say it's going to be $5. And let's say you say, oh, I only want to spend $250, right? And let's say you spend 3 months negotiating this number back and forth, and eventually you end up at $350 or $4. Well, even though the factory has agreed to that price, they are not going to treat you with the priority they would to somebody who actually has agreed to their $5 price.
Right, makes sense.
So while they'll work on your piece, they're only working on it when time allows between the people that are paying full price. So that alone could add months to the schedule. Action figures tend to go faster than statues, which doesn't make a lot of sense because statues don't require steel tools. The problem, though, is that steel tools allow action figures to go fast because steel tools have no margin of error, and every piece of plastic that comes out of that steel tool is exactly the same and exactly right. There's no flaws, and it's really mass production. It really is a process of mass production, almost mindless work. Where statues are silicone molds, and silicone molds have flex to them, and so you may find that 5 or 10% of your castings have some warpage or some weirdness to them, and then you got to figure out, okay, are we going to try to fix this, or are we just going to throw that casting away and make a new one? So statues have a lot of handmade qualities that cause them to take a lot longer to make. So the short final answer is a typical, 6-inch action figure with typical articulation, a month to sculpt it, X number of weeks to get approvals and make changes. It's so up in the air. And then probably 8 months to go from the factory starting it to the factory being able to ship it. You can tighten that up, especially if you're a big client. The factory will, conform to your needs if you're running millions and millions of dollars through them every year. But, if you're not, the factory doesn't have a lot of motivation to bend over backwards to get it done faster.
Okay. we'll let you out. I guess, what are you working on and coming up in the future? What can people be aware of to look out for? And
How can our listeners get in touch with what you're doing, like social media or anything that you have, websites that you want to promote?
Yeah. Well, first, thank you for doing this interview. It was fun. It's always nice to reminisce back to what I call the glory days of action.
No, we appreciate you taking the time.
And we're way over time, so we really appreciate your answers on it and everything. It's so much information. It's awesome.
I have a bunch of action figure stuff going on right now. Most of it I can't quite talk about yet, but I will say that I'm attempting to try to bring the Now Playing line back to life. It won't be called Now Playing, but I feel like there is a market for some of these characters that NECA doesn't feel are worth doing because they probably won't bring in enough money for a company the size of NECA. And I totally understand and respect that. But, now that I've sold PCS, I'm just working out of my house. It's relaxed. I don't need to make a ton of money off of an action figure. I don't have an overhead. I don't have employees. So I have bought a few horror licenses. The one I'll mention that we, meaning me, I'm currently working on a new Pumpkinhead action figure.
Sweet.
I kind of want it to fit in with all the cool stuff NECA's been doing the past decade. And so Pumpkinhead will be the first one. And there's some other ones. Like I said, I have some other licenses for some cool horror stuff.
I'll throw Leprechaun out on the wish list. I'm sure you've heard it a million times, but we need Leprechaun.
I talked to them a couple of weeks ago, and they're completely down. They would like to do it. There is a hitch, which is Warwick Davis. He wants, apparently, I haven't spoken to him or his people, but I was told by the studio he wants a pretty big sum of money. So I have to get in touch with him and explain there's not that much money in this business anymore, but it'll still be fun to do, and I'll pay him something.
He's used to Star Wars figure sales.
Yeah, there you go. So unfortunately, I have no way, I have no social media or anything to give you right now because I don't have a new website up yet. I don't really talk about the business side on my personal Facebook or anything. But when the time comes, and Pumpkinhead will be the first, when the time comes to announce Show Pumpkinhead, I'll definitely be in touch to show you, how it's going. Pumpkinhead is my favorite creature, so I'm very excited to, as you know, at SOTA, I did the big 18-inch Pumpkinhead figure.
It's amazing. And to find those on the collector market, they're going for big bucks. So I think there's definitely a demand, for a new figure.
Yeah. So that's in fact the prototype sitting right here in front of me. So that's the one thing that I'm doing right now that I think your audience will be interested in, is trying to do a complementary horror line to what NECA's been doing. Characters that aren't as popular.
Very cool.
All right. Yeah. As you come up with things, if you want us, email us, we'll definitely promote it on here. I mean, we're definitely buyers too. So we're
awesome.
interested in seeing what's coming out.
So that was our conversation with Jerry from SOTA Toys. Very cool conversation. Lots of great info. Stuff that I had no clue about, man.
Yeah. It's pretty interesting with the licensing stuff and just what it takes to make a figure. And
there's a lot involved. I mean, we all think there's negotiations going on, obviously, within the licensing and everything. But after that's done, it's still a lot of background that needs to get done.
And it sounds like a decent amount of luck goes into it, too. I mean, you got to hit on the right property at the right time.
Yeah, you got to know what's going to sell, what people are, nostalgic for, or what they want to see currently.
Yeah, so this is a little bit off the beaten path, but that's what we want. We talk figures all the time. We got a lot of audience listeners that are figure collectors. So here's a little background into it. It's a little different than our typical actors, but I thought it was still very insightful.
It was cool. And now we know how these things end up in our homes, man.
And I got to do a personal wish list. How cool.
Very cool.
Those Stranger figures, they're going to be in my hands anytime.
You think?
I know it. I know it. Jerry, you're listening.
Maybe you could do like a private one for you or us.
Can we get a prototype?
Yes. No, seriously.
But thanks again, Jerry, for all your time. It was really insightful, like I said, and we appreciate you hanging out with us for for the day here. So
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jerry.
So make sure to follow us on social media. You can hit us up on Facebook, Dysfunctional Nerdcast, email,
Dysfunctionalnerdcast at gmail.com. The Twitterverse.
at DNerdcast. So until next time, go to those relics that they call brick and mortar stores and purchase an action figure.